We are doing Extra Life again this year, where you can mash buttons, roll dice, play games, and help kids along the way. I hope you'll be a part of that with us. Stick around after the video for more information. If I was about to forget every comic story I'd ever read, but could first record a message for myself just before the mind wipe, this would be the result. You're wonderful man in your satin Condor Man, da-da-da-ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues, where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they're special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, this series does freely contain spoilers, but I think that even spoiled, the issues, the stories that I feature are well worth reading. For more info about the intent of this series and what you can expect from it, check out the video on the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel titled Essential Issues Series Introduction. Okay, we've covered some key origin stories from DC Comics. Now we've been moving into stories that feature major events in the DC Universe, or that in some way define the status quo, or that are, in my opinion, very iconic representations of DC characters. Last time we looked at The Killing Joke, which defined the Joker for a generation of comic book readers, and also created the catalyst for Barbara Gordon to eventually take on a new heroic identity as the Oracle, leaving Batgirl behind. Well, pretty close on the heels of that story came another, arguably bigger event in the Batman timeline, a story titled Batman: A Death in the Family. The title, combined with the cover image that you're likely to find for the collected version of this story, gives away the ending, in which Robin tragically, I'll put in quotes, or maybe not so tragically, dies. This story was big news at the time. It even got mainstream news coverage, and older fans of Batman who were no longer reading comics at the time, came out of the woodwork with outrage that a character that they loved had been seemingly thrown away. But this Robin wasn't Dick Grayson, the original Robin, who had already forged his own path with the new crime-fighting name of Nightwing. No, this Robin was Jason Todd, Dick Grayson's replacement, who, unlike Grayson, had a rebellious attitude toward Batman and just a thirst for violence, just had a lot of aggression in him. He was hated by a significant number of readers, and so this story was written actually with two possible endings, both ready to publish as the story goes. In one ending, Jason Todd dies. That's the one that was published. In the other, however, still fitting the title of the story arc, it's only Jason's mother who dies. Readers are presented with two phone numbers that they could call for a fee of 50 cents to cast their vote, and the rest is history, except for a few details that some people might not be aware of. It was reportedly a pretty close decision from fans, although urban myth suggests that one wealthy reader used automation technology to vote all day for Jason Todd's death, which was in fact the outcome when they tallied all the votes. Whatever the truth may be behind the decision, the death of Jason Todd has reverberated in DC Comics even up until today, as far as I know. Now, I haven't been following comics since a couple years into the New 52. That's part of what this whole series is me kind of like reminiscing and catching back up to the New 52, and then seeing what the status quo currently is and whether or not I want to get back into DC Comics on a regular basis or not, after finding the New 52 pretty distasteful. Anyway, as far as I know, Jason Todd as a name and his significance is still very much a part of the DC universe, and he continues to have an ongoing effect. But this story, you may ask, is it worth coming back to, for its own sake? Or maybe is it just a historical artifact that all dedicated DC fans should read merely for the sake of, familiarity with continuity? Well, I will tell you what I think. Here we go. Coming back to it, the first thing I noticed was how I prefer the old newsprint paper quality when reading older comics like this. Reprints either brighten up the colors too much, giving them a childish vibe somehow, or the dot coloring used in the original art doesn't blend when reproduced on modern comic pages, emphasizing the shortcomings of the classic coloring technique. The faded, less colorful original feels more grounded and serious to me somehow, which is fitting for the direction this story takes. The dialogue is dated on the very first page, but the tone has the darkness of modern comics at the same time. The reason being that in the opening scene, Batman and Robin are about to break in on criminals. Not colorful ones with weird names and costumes. They've tracked down the main warehouse of a child pornography network. Dark subject matter for comics, even by today's standards. In addition to the dialogue feeling dated, the costume designs also call back to a bygone era that feels overly simplistic and less realistic. I have never liked Robin's classic costume. I admire the time the character puts into building those leg muscles, but there is something almost creepy about seeing an adult male physique in that bare-legged costume with bright colors and elf boots, as though he isn't just wearing underwear outside his pants like most superheroes, but forgot the pants part of his costume altogether. Likewise, Bruce sitting leisurely in a recliner with his suit on but cowl off just felt odd. You know, in a time before artists added seams, stitching, and buckles to costumes, he looks like a man in some kind of spandex dancer's costume waiting in the green room before the big show that night. But looking past the dated dialogue and visual designs, there is still a very serious story here that is aiming for psychological realism and events grounded in real-world issues. The Joker may look silly and harmless, but he's as deadly as ever, leaving a trail of bodies behind him and looking not to pull off some crazy, jokey public stunt, but to sell a cruise missile on the black market to Arab terrorists to bankroll whatever horrible thing he plans to do next, while also enabling who knows what levels of death and destruction. Since this comic was published, the word terrorist has taken on a much more real and dangerous significance to Americans, making this story age well to the degree it wants to embrace weighty, real-world ideas and dangers. And on top of that, Joker's crippling of Barbara Gordon is mentioned early on, reminding readers that yes, this is the same sadistic Joker that we saw in the shocking one-shot story, The Killing Joke. Now, if you're wondering if you'll feel lost in a story about Jason Todd when you didn't even know Dick Grayson wasn't Robin anymore, have no fear. I'd never heard of Jason Todd when I first read this story, and it still made sense. And coming back to it, I saw why. Throughout the story, Jason and Bruce both remember parts of his backstory that, in steady enough doses throughout, catch the reader up on who Jason is and how he came to be Robin, so we know enough to decide if we care about his death by the time the story ends. Jason lost his parents at a young age, which led to Bruce finding and recruiting him, but alienated from Bruce now and mourning his parents' deaths more than ever, Jason's reminiscing leads him to old documents he had never seen before, including his birth certificate. Although damaged by water, he discovers that the name of his real mother started with an S, whereas the woman who helped raise him was named Catherine. Feeling alone in the world, Jason latches on to hope that he may have some real family left and begins a search to discover the identity and location of his real mother. Jason narrows the search to 3 women, all with intriguing backgrounds, and begins globetrotting in an effort to find them and determine which is his real mother. Meanwhile, Batman is busy tracking down the Joker, torn at the fact that it's necessary for him to delay catching up with Jason due to the more immediate threat. Regardless, Bruce and Jason bump into each other. As it turns out, the different people they are tracking are associates of each other. So Bruce and Jason combine their separate quests for answers into one. One of the women suspected to be Jason's mother is a relief doctor in Ethiopia, running from a past that seems to have involved performing illegal abortions for teenage girls, which was an interesting tidbit. Batman fans might appreciate that another of the women on Jason's list of suspects is Shiva Usan, who turns out to be Lady Shiva, an assassin, the mother of Batgirl Cassandra Cain, and one of the greatest martial artists in the DC universe. She and Batman, of course, have it out before the dynamic duo have the chance to ask if she's ever had a baby. Her answer puts an uncharacteristic expression on her face, and it's a great response that I won't spoil, but it was fun to experience again. Upon seeing the grim conditions in an Ethiopian refugee camp, Bruce notably narrates to himself, "It's utterly heartbreaking. When I return to Gotham, I'll send out another check to help the effort and try to forget what I've seen here. I'm no different from anyone else. There's only so much even Bruce Wayne and Batman can do." The art can't really convey the sad realities of third world poverty and oppression, but I think it tries respectfully. And Bruce, in a very human moment, reflects both compassion and the limits of his compassion. He commits to being a part of the solution, but at the end of the day, he doesn't want to have to keep thinking about the misery of this people group. I actually wonder if we are meant to much more continually enter into feeling grief and mourning for others, rather than coming to a point where we say, I just don't want to think about this anymore. I just need to stop thinking about this, I know that's a complex issue. I'm not saying that there's some kind of rule about that we should follow, but I don't think the writer here either was saying that this is like the ideal response. I think he was just giving Bruce a human moment where he was like, I want to help, I'm going to help, but I also don't know how to deal with this, But Jesus really continually entered into grief and mourning for others. He was called a man of sorrows, in part because of how much he unceasingly loved others and the constant pain that brought him as a result. And after reading this page, I found myself reflecting on what my wife Holly and I are doing to help people in these kinds of conditions. And I just had to admit how easily content I am to send a check, write a sponsor letter now and then, but otherwise not think about or pray for the very real people living in just like what would be for us nightmarish situations every day. When Jason finally reunites with his shocked mother, despite the dated art and dialogue, despite how much I really don't like Jason at the start of this story, somehow, through all that, I see a broken kid who lost everything, yet somehow found his mom. Decades later now, as a dad, this moment has its intended, surprisingly moving effect on me for the first time. But soon after their reunion, Jason learns that his mother is being blackmailed by the Joker for medical supplies that he can then sell on the black market, which leads them to the warehouse that will serve as the setting for one of the most brutally memorable scenes in DC Comics history. After ignoring a plea from Batman to wait for him to return, Jason disobeys yet again for the last time and suits up to save his mother from the Joker. But after a cold-hearted betrayal, Jason is suddenly subject to the Joker's whims, and he is feeling anything but whimsical. Setting aside the acid flowers and other gag weapons, the Joker simply picks up a crowbar nearby and sets loose his mania on the helpless boy wonder. The images that follow are far from the most gory and explicit in comics. In fact, they may be more effective and unsettling for what they only hint at, such as the downward arc of Joker's two-handed crowbar swing, which you can only imagine sends the forked end of the crowbar into Jason's back, doing unspeakable harm as it undoubtedly both breaks his bones and rips him open. To cover his trail, the Joker sets a time bomb and ties up Jason's mom to it, assuming Jason is already done for. But Jason is barely hanging on and determined to get his mom to safety, doing a lot more again to make him a likable character to me. But being likable doesn't disarm bombs, and just when it looks like the two will survive, hope is yanked out from under them. The warehouse explodes just as Batman arrives and begins frantically searching the burning mess, rapidly meanwhile reliving his years spent with the boy, beginning with the first time they met. In fact, right here it actually becomes a bit much, like a heavy-handed recap to sort of catch up readers who may have only purchased this issue of the story. That's definitely what that moment felt like. When he does find Jason, it's immediately obvious that he's too late, and as he recovers the body, we are given one of the most historic and iconic full-page spreads in all of comic books. But the story doesn't end there. Naturally, Batman wants revenge. In fact, he begins going down a very dark path, sounding a lot like he's finally going to kill the Joker, who even baits him by telling him where to meet at the United Nations building. To Batman's shock, the Joker arrives in a limo and steps out as the new Iranian ambassador to the UN. After making a deal with the Ayatollah, he has complete diplomatic immunity, meaning government agents and any superheroes tolerated by the government, such as Batman, can't touch him. Knowing this would enrage Batman, the U.S. State Department asked Superman to meet with Batman before the Joker arrived to prevent his ally from doing something he would regret. I'm not going to spoil the exchange between these two iconic heroes in that scene, but it's another great reason to check this story out. The situation leaves Batman and Superman at odds with each other. Batman is convinced that the law and justice are opposed to each other in this instance, while Superman is bound to uphold the law. Yes, vengeance is involved in Batman's motives, heavily. But it's still, I think, clear to the reader that this is a great injustice for the Joker to have the immunity he does, creating a nice moral, even philosophical dilemma to consider. Romans 13 tells believers to submit to the governing authorities because God has put them in their positions, even if they are not godly people. And yet there are rare cases in Scripture where God seems to bless or direct those who break human laws. So how do we sort through that? I think this story beat can potentially lead us to contemplating that issue. I do think it's a bit much for an installment of Essential Issues to take on, but it's an issue well worth exploring another time. I will let you experience the ending for yourself. Both Batman and Superman are involved, and as you can rightly assume, the Joker does not die. It all comes to, I think, a fitting climax, but with an outcome that leaves Batman unsatisfied and all the more fueled to follow a dark path in pursuit of justice. The fact that this story had such a major effect on Batman history and comics history in general, and the gimmick of allowing readers to decide the ultimate fate of Jason Todd, provide plenty of reasons to check out this story from a purely historical standpoint. But if you can adjust to the older art style and sometimes painfully dated writing, the foundations of the story, the core skeleton structure, if you will, I think, and the tone that it sets, I think it still holds up well with its desire for grounded and gritty drama that I think keeps you taking things seriously, even as other elements feel far below current standards. So it's a mixed bag today, but the combination of historical impact and grounded, serious story beats make it worth reading, though you may want to try a library or wait for the price to drop a little. As of this recording, Batman: A Death in the Family is available for between $15 and $18 on Amazon.com. Now, for the origin story of Tim Drake, Jason Todd's replacement as Robin, check out the trade paperbacks Batman: A Lonely Place of Dying and Robin: A Hero Reborn. The first establishes who Tim Drake is and why he's worthy in heart and mind to take the mantle of Robin. The second is his coming of age as he trains and truly becomes capable of taking on that role and gets a much better costume. Neither of these are quite essential, I don't think, so I'm not going to be doing an installment on them, but I do think they're worth reading eventually if you especially like Batman or more recent runs of Teen Titans. And I find Tim Drake to be a much more likable Robin that is easy for me to respect and admire. Okay, now that we've covered the vital ground of Jason Todd's death, we're ready to move backward a bit in publishing and forward a lot in the DC Comics timeline, if you even consider it to be a part of official continuity. It's a story about Batman's future, but one that radically redefined the character from the mid-'80s onward, and still, I think, really defines who he is today. It may or may not ultimately be a part of DC Comics continuity, but it is essential reading, as almost every comic fan already knows. Next time, we're going to take a look at the hugely influential story by Frank Miller, Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. It is time for Extra Life again, and I'd love for you to be a part of it with me. Here's a recycled but slightly modified promo to tell you more. Once again this year, Christian Geek Central is participating in Extra Life. This is a charity that raises funds for the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals, which provides free medical care to children whose families could otherwise not afford it. And this is very often for critical, life-saving treatment. Joining our team only requires a willingness to ask your family and friends to consider donating toward your fundraising efforts. Participants also usually do something fun and game-related to draw attention to their fundraising efforts, like a special game night at your home or your church, or like me, you could do a crazy 24-hour video gaming marathon. Now, I'm theming it around video games, but really this event can be themed around any kind of gaming, which includes both video games and tabletop games of any kind. What you do to raise funds is entirely up to you, but I would love for you to consider joining the Christian Geek Central Extra Life team. As team leader, I'll be there to help answer your questions, provide some helpful tips if I can, and just in general be your fundraising cheerleader and try to draw attention myself to your fundraising efforts. You can get more information about the event as a whole at extra-life.org, and if you choose to sign up there, be sure to select Christian Geek Central as your team so I can get in touch with you and then just help in whatever way I can. Fundraising can begin at any time, but our main push is going to be through the month of October leading up to November 2nd. That's the annual Extra Life Game Day, when I'll be streaming my 24-hour video gaming marathon live and trying to stay awake without throwing up. More details on my live stream as we get closer to it. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.